The sound of mats being slapped echoed across the training hall as students warmed up for another intense night of jiu-jitsu practice. Among them was a woman named Clara, quiet, gentle, and seemingly out of place among the loud, confident fighters surrounding her. She moved with care, greeting everyone softly, her smile warm but reserved. Most of the men barely noticed her at first except for a few snickers when she fumbled tying her belt or when she hesitated before sparring. The coach called for pairs, and Clara found herself standing in front of a tall, muscular man named Brad, a black belt known for his arrogance and heavy ego. He looked at her and laughed, shaking his head as if the idea of sparring with her was some kind of joke. "You sure you signed up for the right class?" he asked loud enough for others to hear, and the room filled with quiet laughter. Clara only nodded, adjusting her stance with calm focus. Brad shrugged, stretching his arms, ready to show everyone how easily he could handle her. They touched hands to start the match, and in that moment Clara's calm eyes locked onto his with quiet determination. Brad lunged first, aiming to grab her collar, but Clara moved like water, flowing past his force and redirecting it effortlessly. In a blink, she shifted her weight, wrapped her legs around his arm, and rolled gracefully into a flawless armbar. The room went silent as Brad struggled, his face turning red, his body twisting to escape, but it was too late. Within seconds, the sharp sound of tapping filled the air. 14 seconds had passed. Clara released the hold immediately and stood up, offering him a hand, her gentle expression unchanged. The same people who had laughed earlier now stared in disbelief, whispering among themselves. The coach smiled slightly, pride flashing in his eyes, though he said nothing at first, letting the silence stretch over the stunned room. Brad rubbed his arm, avoiding eye contact, the smirk on his face completely gone, replaced by something between shame and respect. Clara bowed politely, stepping aside, her breathing steady, her movements composed, as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. But everyone knew something had changed in that moment. Whispers followed her as she walked off the mat, people asking who she was, where she trained, how someone so gentle could be so powerful. Clara simply smiled and began helping a beginner fix their grip on a belt, her tone kind, her posture relaxed. She didn't need to prove anything. Her skills spoke louder than any words could. And from that day forward, no one in that class ever underestimated her again. After class ended, most of the students gathered around, still talking about what they had just seen. Brad stayed behind, pretending to stretch, but his eyes kept glancing at Clara, who was calmly folding her gi at the edge of the mat. The coach walked over to her, his voice calm, but filled with curiosity. "That was a textbook armbar, Clara. Where did you learn that?" Clara looked up, her expression humble, almost shy. "I used to train with my brother back home," she said softly. "He taught me to stay calm no matter who was in front of me." Brad finally stood up, walking toward them, his usual confidence replaced by quiet reflection. "You got me good," he admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "I thought I had you." Clara smiled slightly, her tone gentle but firm. "Sometimes strength isn't about how hard you hit, it's about how well you understand the flow." Brad nodded, his respect clear and genuine this time. The coach clapped his hands and called everyone to gather up for closing remarks, but the energy in the room felt different, now more grounded, more respectful. As everyone bowed out, Clara picked up her bag and began heading for the door when a younger student ran up to her. "Miss Clara, can you show me that move you did? I want to learn how to stay that calm too." Clara stopped, smiling warmly. "Sure," she said. "Maybe next class we can practice it together." Outside, the night air was cool, the street lights flickering softly as she walked to her car. She could still hear faint laughter and voices from inside, but they sounded lighter now, without mockery. Clara paused, looking back through the gym window, seeing Brad teaching a few white belts how to escape an armbar, a small grin tugging at his lips. She chuckled softly, shaking her head before driving off, her thoughts drifting back to her early days on the mat, the times she was doubted, the moments she questioned her own strength. She had learned long ago that gentleness wasn't weakness, it was control. And in a place where pride ruled every corner of the mat, her calm spirit had become her greatest weapon. The next week, when she returned to class, the whispers had changed tone. People greeted her with nods of respect. Even Brad walked up to her, offering a friendly handshake before training began. "Ready for round 2? He asked with a faint grin. Clara smiled, tightening her belt. Always, she replied softly, as they both stepped back onto the mat where everything began. The class circled around once again as pairs began to form on the mats. This time there was no laughter, no whispers of doubt, only the steady rhythm of warm-ups and quiet focus. Clara and Brad stood across from each other, the air between them charged but respectful. They bowed and began to circle slowly, each step deliberate, each breath measured. Brad moved first, trying a sweep that would have caught most off guard, but Clara countered with graceful precision, redirecting his momentum without force, only timing. Their movements flowed like a dance, every exchange smoother than the last. Brad was stronger, heavier, faster, but Clara's control kept him off balance, his strength fading against her patience. The coach watched closely, his arms crossed, his eyes narrowing as he studied their rhythm, like a teacher watching two artists share a silent language. Minutes passed before Brad managed to get a hold around Clara's shoulder, pressing down with his full weight. It looked like he finally had control, but Clara remained calm, her breathing steady, her gaze focused on the floor. Then in one fluid motion she twisted, rolled, and reversed their positions, trapping Brad's leg in a triangle choke. He hesitated, fighting to escape, but the pressure built quickly, his vision blurring as he realized she had him again. He tapped once, twice, breathless, and smiling this time as she released him. The room broke into applause, something rare in training, but the moment felt right. Clara bowed again, helping Brad up, their eyes meeting in mutual respect. "Nice one," he said between breaths. "I guess gentle doesn't mean weak after all." Clara shook her head softly. "Gentle means knowing when not to fight," she said, her tone calm but firm. The coach stepped forward, clapping once to get everyone's attention. "Let this be a lesson," he said. "Strength without control is chaos, but control with heart, that is true mastery." The students nodded, the message sinking deep as they returned to their drills, watching Clara with newfound admiration. When class ended, Brad sat beside Clara near the wall, both sipping water in silence. "You ever think of teaching?" he asked, breaking the quiet. Clara looked at him, surprised for a moment, then smiled. "Maybe someday, but I still have a lot to learn myself." Brad chuckled. "Trust me, you're already teaching more than you think." Outside, the sun had nearly set, painting the street with a soft orange glow. Clara gathered her things, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. For the first time since joining the class, she felt seen, not for how she looked or how quietly she spoke, but for the quiet strength she carried inside. And as she stepped out of the gym, the cool evening breeze brushed against her face, whispering the same calm truth she had lived by all along. Gentleness was never her weakness, it was her power. The next morning, Clara arrived early to the gym, the mats still cool beneath her bare feet, as she began her warm-up in silence. She liked the quiet before class, the soft echo of her steps, the faint hum of the air conditioning. It was her moment of stillness before the chaos of training began. She stretched slowly, moving through each motion with precision, her focus deep, her mind calm. The door opened, and Brad stepped in, carrying his gear bag, a small grin on his face when he saw her already on the mat. "You beat everyone here again," he said, dropping his bag beside the wall. Clara smiled lightly. "Habit," she replied, and went back to her warm-up. Brad joined her without another word, matching her pace, trying to copy her fluid movements, but struggling to keep the same steady rhythm. After a while, the coach walked in, surprised to see the two of them already practicing together. He raised an eyebrow and said, "Looks like I might not need to run class today, you two seem to have it handled." Brad laughed, but Clara just bowed respectfully and continued drilling. When the rest of the students arrived, the atmosphere felt different. There was excitement, but also a sense of quiet respect that hadn't been there before. Everyone wanted to train with Clara, not because she was fast or flashy, but because she made them feel calm and capable. She taught with patience, correcting small mistakes, showing the details others often overlooked. Even the beginners who once hesitated to approach her now lined up for a chance to learn from her. During one of the breaks, the coach called her aside, his tone serious but kind. "Clara," he said, "I've been watching you these past few weeks. You've got something special, something this team needs." She looked at him, unsure what to say, her hands fidgeting slightly. He continued, "I'd like you to help me run the fundamentals class starting next week. You've got the right balance of control and understanding." Clara blinked in surprise. "Me?" she asked softly. The coach nodded. "Absolutely. And you've earned it." Brad overheard the conversation and grinned from across the mat, clapping his hands once in support. "Told you were already teaching," he called out. Clara felt her cheeks warm, but she only bowed her head humbly. "Thank you, coach. I'll do my best." That evening she stayed behind again, watching the students leave one by one, their laughter fading into the night. She sat on the edge of the mat, staring at the faint scuffs and marks left from countless hours of training, each one a memory, a lesson, a story of perseverance. The lights dimmed slowly as she stood stretching one last time before heading out into the night air. The street outside was quiet, the moonlight reflecting softly off parked cars and distant windows. She walked slowly, breathing in the cool night, thinking about how far she had come and how much further she could go. In every movement, in every calm breath, she carried the strength that no one saw at first, the power of stillness, the quiet heart of a warrior. A few days later, the gym was livelier than usual. New students had joined, and the air buzzed with chatter and nervous excitement. Clara stood near the edge of the mat, watching them tie their belts with trembling hands. She remembered her first day, the same mix of nerves and curiosity. Brad walked in, carrying a bag full of training pads, giving her a nod as he passed by. "Ready for another long session?" he said with a grin. "Always," she replied, her calm voice barely above a whisper, but filled with quiet energy. The coach gathered everyone around, explaining that today would be different. Clara would lead the warm-up and teach the basics of control and positioning. There was a ripple of surprise through the room, but no laughter this time, only respect and anticipation. Clara stepped forward, her posture straight, her eyes soft yet firm. She began the session with slow, controlled movements, showing how every motion began with balance and awareness. Her instructions were simple but precise, her tone patient, as she corrected each student with care. Brad watched from the back, smiling as he saw how naturally she guided the room, her confidence steady, but never loud. Even the most restless beginners seemed to slow down under her calm rhythm, moving more carefully, more thoughtfully, as they followed her lead. When the drills ended, the coach clapped his hands, calling everyone to gather around once more. "This is what true jiu-jitsu looks like," he said, pointing toward Clara. "Quiet, focused control, and understanding. She doesn't overpower, she adapts, she listens, and she grows." Clara bowed slightly, her heart warm, but her face still composed, humility woven into every gesture. After class, Brad tossed her a water bottle, saying, "Looks like you're officially a teacher now." Clara smiled softly. "Maybe just a helper for now," she replied, but her eyes carried a quiet spark of pride. As the others packed up and left, Brad stayed behind, helping her clean the mats in silence, the rhythmic sound of the mop moving across the floor filling the empty space. "You know," Brad said after a moment, "I used to think strength was about domination, about winning fast, about showing off, but now I see it's more about patience and control." Clara looked at him thoughtfully, nodding. "Strength without kindness loses its meaning," she said gently. Brad smiled, shaking his head. "You really do talk like a philosopher, you know that." Clara laughed quietly, for the first time, her laughter filling the quiet gym like a breeze after rain. Outside, the night stretched endlessly, the stars barely visible through the city lights, but Clara felt something deep within her awaken, a steady, calm fire that reminded her of why she started training in the first place. Not to prove herself, not to beat others, but to master the space between strength and peace. She sat by the window, tying her belt once more, her hands moving slowly, her thoughts steady, as the hum of the night surrounded her. Tomorrow she would return to the mat again, to teach, to learn, to grow in silence and motion. The next morning the sky was still gray when Clara arrived at the gym, the quiet streets glistening from a light rain that had fallen through the night. She unlocked the door and stepped inside, the faint scent of mats and sweat mixing with the cool morning air. It felt like home in its own strange way. She placed her bag in the corner and began her usual warm-up, moving through stretches and drills with the same calm rhythm her body knew by heart. After a few minutes, the door opened and a young girl stepped in. She couldn't have been more than 12, holding a brand new GI still stiff from the store. She looked nervous, her hands clutching the sleeves as she hesitated near the entrance. Clara paused and smiled softly at her. "Come in, it's all right," she said gently. The girl nodded slowly, stepping onto the mat, her shoes squeaking against the floor. "First day?" Clara asked. The girl nodded again. "Yes, my brother said I should try, but I'm scared, I'm not strong enough." Clara crouched to her level, her voice quiet but firm. You don't have to be strong to start, you just have to be patient. Strength comes later, calm comes first. The girl listened, eyes wide, then smiled a little for the first time. Brad entered a moment later carrying coffee, and paused when he saw them talking. He smiled faintly and handed Clara a cup without saying anything. The girl watched him curiously, then whispered to Clara, "Is he a black belt?" Clara nodded yes, and he's a good training partner too, even though he talks too much sometimes. Brad laughed hearing her comment. "Hey, I heard that," he said, but there was warmth in his voice. The girl giggled, the tension easing from her shoulders as the atmosphere lightened. Soon other students began to arrive, the gym filling with movement and sound, but Clara's focus stayed on helping the girl through the first steps, learning how to fall, how to roll, how to breathe through each motion. Each time the girl stumbled, Clara guided her calmly, reminding her to stay relaxed, to trust the ground beneath her. By the end of the class, the girl's movements had changed. She stood taller, more confident, her fear replaced with quiet determination. As everyone packed up, the coach approached Clara, and Brad nodding approvingly. "Looks like we've got a new prodigy," he said, glancing toward the girl who was now chatting excitedly with her brother. Clara smiled softly. Maybe she just needed someone to believe in her. Brad leaned against the wall watching the girl run out with her brother. "You really do have a gift, Clara," he said, "not just for fighting, but for people." Clara looked at him thoughtfully. "I think fighting is just a way to learn about people," she replied. "It teaches you who they are and who you are when things get hard." Brad nodded quietly, his respect deep and unspoken. The sun was setting again when they finished cleaning the mats, the golden light streaming through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Clara stood there for a moment, gazing at the empty mat, her reflection faint in the polished surface, feeling the stillness settle deep inside her. Every day here felt like another lesson, not just in technique, but in patience, compassion, and quiet strength. And as she turned off the lights and stepped outside into the fading light, the cool air brushed against her skin like a reminder that growth never ends, it only changes shape with every breath and every step. The following week brought new faces to the gym, people who had heard whispers about the quiet woman who made a black belt tap in seconds. They came with curiosity, some with skepticism, and others with quiet admiration, wanting to see for themselves what made Clara different. Clara greeted each person with the same calm smile, her voice steady as she guided them through their first steps on the mat. Brad stood nearby helping organize groups, but his eyes often drifted toward Clara, watching how effortlessly she carried the room without raising her voice once. The coach noticed, too, crossing his arms with a faint grin as he watched her move between students, correcting postures and offering soft encouragement. When it came time for sparring, Brad gestured toward Clara, silently asking for another round. She nodded, tying her belt slowly and stepping onto the mat. The room grew quiet as they faced each other again, everyone watching in anticipation. They bowed and began circling their feet, sliding lightly across the mat, Brad's movements more cautious than before, his respect for her skill clear in every motion. Clara stayed composed, waiting, reading his rhythm, her breathing steady, her expression calm. Brad tried a feint followed by a sweep, but Clara countered effortlessly, redirecting him and taking his back in one smooth motion. He struggled to escape, but her control was precise, like water flowing around stone, never forcing, never rushing. Within moments, he was trapped again, caught between defense and surrender, his strength fading against her timing. He tapped, and the crowd exhaled, the tension breaking into applause once more. Clara released the hold and helped him up, both smiling this time, with shared understanding rather than surprise. "You've gotten faster," Brad said, breathing hard but laughing. "Or maybe you've just slowed down," Clara replied, her tone teasing but kind. The coach clapped his hands, ending the session, everyone gathering around as he spoke loud enough for all to hear. "What you just saw isn't luck or brute strength," he said. "It's patience, it's awareness, it's mastery of the self. If you train long enough, you'll learn that this is what true jiu-jitsu looks like." The students nodded, some still whispering in awe, others silent with thought as they absorbed the lesson. After class, Brad and Clara sat outside on the gym steps, sipping water as the night breeze cooled their skin. "You ever think about competing again?" Brad asked after a long pause. Clara looked at him, her eyes soft in the dim light. "Maybe someday," she said, "but I'm not sure competition is what I'm looking for anymore." "Then what are you looking for?" he asked. Clara looked up at the stars, her voice almost a whisper. "Peace, I think, and maybe helping others find it too." Brad nodded quietly, understanding more than he could put into words. The streetlights flickered nearby, the hum of the city fading into the background as they sat there in silence, both knowing that what Clara had built went far beyond the mat. Inside the gym, the mats waited empty, but alive with memory, every roll, every fall, every quiet victory stitched into their surface like chapters in a story still unfolding. The next morning, the sky was pale with early light when Clara unlocked the gym door once again. The mats were cool beneath her feet, the stillness comforting like an old friend welcoming her back. She took a deep breath and began her warm-up, slow and deliberate her movements, steady, her mind focused on each breath. A few minutes later, Brad arrived earlier than usual, his hair still damp from the morning rain. "You really don't take a day off, do you?" he said, smiling as he set down his bag. Clara shook her head lightly. "The mat feels strange when it's empty," she replied softly. "It's like it remembers when no one else does." Brad chuckled, sitting beside her as she stretched. "I guess that's why you're so good at this. You don't just train, you listen to the space around you." Clara said nothing for a moment, then nodded. "That's how my brother taught me. The mat is honest. It never lies about what you need to learn." Brad looked at her curiously. "You talk about your brother a lot. Did he train too?" She paused, her eyes softening. "Yes, he was my first teacher. He used to tell me that control begins in silence." Brad nodded slowly. "That explains everything about you," he said with a small grin, calm, precise, impossible to read. Clara smiled faintly, but her gaze drifted toward the mat, as if seeing a memory unfold on its surface. Before Brad could speak, the door opened again. The young girl from before walked in, her face lighting up when she saw Clara. "You came early," Clara said, standing to greet her. The girl nodded. "I wanted to practice that role you showed me," she said proudly. Clara smiled. "Then let's do it together." Brad watched as the two began practicing, the girl mimicking Clara's movements with growing confidence, her falls becoming smoother, her rhythm more natural. Every now and then Clara corrected her posture with a gentle tap or quiet word, her patience endless, her tone never harsh. When the girl finally completed a full sequence without hesitation, Clara clapped her hands softly. "That was perfect. You see, you can do it when you breathe through it." The girl beamed, standing taller than before. "Thank you, Miss Clara." The moment carried something unspoken, something that filled the room with warmth that no words could explain. Brad leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching silently, his usual grin replaced by quiet admiration. He could see now what made her different. She wasn't just teaching jiu-jitsu, she was teaching presence. She was showing people how to find strength in stillness. As the day went on, more students arrived, and the room filled with motion again, but the same calm energy lingered in every corner, guided by Clara's quiet influence. Even the coach seemed to notice it, smiling to himself as he walked past, whispering under his breath, "She's changing the whole place without even trying." When class ended and the students left, Clara stayed behind, once more kneeling on the mat and pressing her hand to its surface, her eyes closed in thought. The sound of rain began again outside, soft and steady like a rhythm only she could hear. Brad approached quietly, stopping a few feet away, not wanting to break her moment of peace. "You really love this place, don't you?" he said gently. Clara opened her eyes and looked up at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's where I learned who I am." Brad smiled softly. "Then I guess we're all learning that one way or another." The rain kept falling outside, steady and calm, as the two stood in silence, the gym filled with the quiet hum of lights and the faint echo of footsteps that had long since faded. The rain kept tapping against the windows as the evening light dimmed into soft gray shadows across the mats. Clara stood and began wiping down the floor, the cloth gliding smoothly over the surface, leaving faint streaks of reflection under the lights. Brad picked up another cloth and joined her without a word, working beside her in quiet rhythm, their movements in sync, like an unspoken drill they had done 100 times before. After a while, he said softly, "I think you've changed this gym more than you realize. People are calmer now. They actually listen, they train with focus." Clara kept cleaning, her expression thoughtful. Maybe they just needed a reminder that control comes from respect, not from fear. Brad smiled faintly. "Maybe you should put that on a banner above the mat." She laughed quietly, shaking her head. "Banners fade," she said. "Lessons stay if people are ready to learn." They finished cleaning and sat down by the wall, the room now silent except for the sound of the rain and their breathing. Clara looked at her hands resting on her knees, small marks and faint bruises showing where the GI fabric had rubbed her skin over time. Every one of these tells a story, she said, more to herself than to him, a story about letting go, not about fighting. Brad nodded, understanding her words, even if he didn't answer right away. After a long pause, he spoke again. There's a tournament coming up next month. The coach wants us to send someone to represent the gym. He thinks you should go. Clara turned to him, her brow lifting slightly. Me? She asked quietly. He nodded. Yeah, you've earned it. She looked down, thinking for a moment, her fingers tracing the edge of her belt. I don't know, she said finally. I never trained for medals, I trained to understand. Brad leaned back, resting against the wall. Maybe that's why you should go, because you're not chasing a win, you're chasing mastery. Clara smiled faintly, his words settling deep in her mind like a seed waiting for light. She stood, walking to the center of the mat, once more feeling the soft give under her feet. The room felt different now, quieter, deeper, like it was listening. She moved through a slow sequence, her balance perfect, her breath, even every motion deliberate, like a meditation. Brad watched from the wall, the rain outside fading into a soft drizzle as the world seemed to pause around her. When she finished, she stood still for a long moment, eyes closed, her palms open at her sides. Then she looked at Brad, a calm certainty in her gaze. I'll think about it, she said softly. Brad smiled. Take your time, he replied. We'll be here when you decide. The lights flickered once as the rain stopped completely, leaving only the quiet hum of the city outside. Clara picked up her bag and slung it over her shoulder, pausing by the door before turning back for one last look at the empty mat. It felt alive even now, holding every fall, every tap, every breath of progress. She smiled to herself, then stepped out into the cool night, the air damp and fresh as if the rain had washed something away, leaving only clarity behind. The next few days moved quietly, the rain giving way to soft sunlight that poured through the tall gym windows each morning. Clara arrived early, as always, her movements precise, her focus steady. She flowed through drills alone, the sound of her bare feet sliding across the mat filling the still air. She could feel the decision about the tournament sitting quietly in her thoughts, like a question waiting to be answered. Every time she practiced, she thought about it, not with pressure or fear, but with curiosity, wondering what lesson it might hold for her. Brad began joining her in the mornings, their sessions unplanned but natural, like two rhythms merging into one steady beat. Sometimes they trained in silence, sometimes they talked in between rolls, but always there was respect in every exchange. One morning after sparring, Brad sat on the edge of the mat, breathing hard, his GI drenched in sweat. He looked at Clara, who was calmly readying her belt. You know, he said between breaths, if you enter that tournament you'll face people who fight to win, not to learn. They'll go hard, they won't hold back. Clara looked at him, her face calm. I know, she said softly, that's why I need to go, not to win against them, but to learn how to stay centered when everything around me moves too fast. Brad nodded slowly, his respect for her deepening with every word. The coach walked in midway through their conversation, overhearing enough to smile. You sound ready, Clara, he said. She gave a small nod. Not yet, maybe soon, but I will be. The coach clapped his hands. Good, that's the right kind of answer, he said before walking off to prepare for the evening class. Later that day during practice, the young girl from before ran up to Clara holding a small notebook filled with scribbles and drawings. Look, Miss Clara, she said, I wrote down what you taught me about breathing and balance, so I don't forget. Clara took the notebook, gently flipping through the pages, her heart warming at the sight of the little drawings of stances and rolls. You're doing wonderfully, she said softly. Keep writing what you feel. When you train, not just what you do, that's how you'll really learn. The girl smiled proudly, clutching the notebook to her chest before. The night deep in the sky, heavy with clouds, and the air carrying the faint scent of approaching rain. Clara stood from the mat slowly, her movements graceful and unhurried. She reached for her bag and slung it over her shoulder, pausing for one last look around the quiet gym. Every sound she had ever made here still seemed to echo in the walls, the soft thud of falls, the sharp clap of a tap, the calm rhythm of breath and motion. Brad walked out from the locker room, wiping his hands with a towel. He smiled when he saw her still standing there, lost in thought. You're really going to do it, aren't you? He said gently. Clara turned to him, her expression calm, but certain. Yes, she said, I think it's time. Brad nodded. I'll be there to cheer for you. She smiled softly, then looked out the window where the first drops of rain had begun to fall again, slow and steady against the glass. The sound filled the room like a familiar rhythm, peaceful and alive. On the day of the tournament, the gym buzzed with noise and energy, fighters warming up, coaches shouting instructions, the crowd restless with anticipation. Clara stood quietly at the edge of the mat, her eyes closed, her breath slow, the chaos around her fading into silence. When her name was called, she stepped forward, bowing respectfully before her opponent. The match began, and for a few seconds the world blurred into motion, her opponent aggressive, fast, and powerful, but Clara stayed calm, letting each strike, each grab, each movement flow past her like water around stone. Then, in one fluid motion, she shifted her weight, took her opponent's arm, and brought her to the ground, the crowd gasping as the tap echoed through the air. 14 seconds. Clara released the hold and stood, her breathing even, her gaze steady. She bowed again, then stepped back as the referee raised her hand. The crowd erupted in applause, but Clara only smiled quietly, her heart steady, her mind at peace. Brad and the coach watched from the sidelines, clapping with pride, the young girl from the gym cheering louder than anyone else, waving her small notebook in the air. Clara walked off the mat, her GI damp with sweat, her spirit light like she had just completed a circle that began long ago. Brad met her halfway, grinning. That was incredible. 14 seconds again, he said, shaking his head in disbelief. Clara smiled softly. Maybe it was never about the time, she said. Maybe it was about learning how to stay calm in every moment. Outside, the rain had stopped, the clouds breaking apart to reveal a soft golden light stretching across the horizon. Clara stepped out into the open air, the cool breeze brushing her face, the world quiet and still. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing it in, the peace she had found, not from winning, but from understanding herself. The journey had come full circle, yet it felt like it was only beginning. She walked down the path slowly, the sound of her footsteps fading into the distance, her calm presence lingering like the afterglow of a setting sun.